I actually recommend for a lot of clinicians. It's to think about your job with a business lens. So no matter how clinical or scientific you are, when you work for a company, it's revenue minus COGS, costs, SG&A and COGS is profit.
Hey everyone, welcome to Leadership Rounds, a podcast shining a spotlight on exceptional clinician executives thriving and driving innovation at the intersection of business and healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Reena Pandey, and together we'll explore the wisdom and insights of great healthcare executives and craft a prescription for leadership success, one candid conversation at a time. Liz, thank you so much for joining. Just such a treat to have you participate in this podcast with me. I feel like we're marching in parallel lines here as we both try to elevate the voices of clinician executives. So it's a particular thrill to have you share in this journey with me. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
There's so much to talk about and we can go in any direction. I would love to just jump in with titles. And what I mean by that is your current title is not one that we typically see for a physician leader, and that's Chief Commercial Officer. And I'm just cutting right to the chase because I feel a real strong pull to help the world throw away some of these existing biases about what physician or clinician executives can and can't do. And I think people put us in boxes, and there isn't a broad enough understanding of what we're capable of. And I love that you're not in a typical title. I hate titles. I hate the title thing, but I love it that you have a non-typical title. So tell us about your job, your role, and maybe a little bit about your journey to Chief Commercial Officer at Everly.
Absolutely. I'll say a few things. One is that, number one, I had a very supportive leader, a boss, a CEO that was not only seeing some gaps in what she felt was important for the company, but also willingness to entertain and think about different roles with different folks. And I think for any organization, you just have to have some of that to start with. The second is that I had a skill set already. So I did lead sales teams in the past for my own companies. And these are times where I was my own CEO and had to lead a sales team and had to build out my own capabilities from sales opportunities to lead gen to figuring out what's the scope, total addressable market, thinking about how do we create a pipeline and all of these deals. So a chief commercial officer made sense. But I think the third is also focusing on this idea that you can reinvent your career anytime. And I have found that to be true, both sitting on different boards. I'm on a retail board for Walmart, Mexico, Central America, but I'm also on other boards that are, let's say, AI robotics. There are things where I feel like as a clinician, you have some skill sets of understanding quality assurance and managing patients and care teams, but it's pretty translatable. And so looking at the title, I do think it may not make immediate sense to have a chief commercial officer be an MD, but I think part of it is also having some background as an MBA. That's why I do encourage people to have, if they have the opportunity and the chance to think about dual degrees, executive education, building out that. And then also, even when I look for hiring, I actually do look for self-initiated, self-driven folks that will add on certificates, add on learning experiences that make them feel like they are constantly reinventing and constantly trying to be ahead of the curve and or to try to future-proof their careers, which is something I really believe in as digital health and all these things are exploding for clinicians to be ahead of the curve in knowing where their skill sets can not only be useful and be an asset, but also what they can tag on.
There's so many threads that I could pull on in the comments you just made. Let's go back to starting your own company, because your point about, of course, I was able to do Chief Commercial Officer because I was a founder and a CEO once upon a time, and all of that was under you, no doubt. So take me back a couple of layers in your reinventions and tell me about your time founding companies. What kind of companies did you found? What was that experience like?
Absolutely. So I worked with a co-founder of mine in Asia for a while, and I built a tech-enabled education company. It did all sorts of things to flip the classroom. And that was back when I was in medical school and business school. I was doing a joint degree at Harvard, and I felt very strongly that I had a calling back to my roots. I'm of Chinese descent, and I wanted to be part of this interesting China story of how things were getting built out. And I wanted more international experience. So I left residency for 2 years to actually build that with my co-founder. That was a very important experience for me to do some international work because there were so many things that were uncomfortable, I would say, in terms of being in a new environment, speaking a language that I felt I was pretty good at, but business terms and other things were always difficult. I had to learn on the job and also be in this immersed environment with Shanghai and Beijing. And that was an interesting experience to just build out. We timed the market well. We were lucky. We ended up selling it to private equity firms. So I came back to the States and I was working for American Well, this great company, learned a ton from the two CEOs. But then I will jump in. I had a stillbirth and I lost a baby at 9 months, full-term pregnancy. So I took off some time.
Yeah.
I know we're getting pretty deep right away.
Yeah, no, but thank you for sharing. We've talked a bit about vulnerability and the importance of sharing our stories, and I appreciate that.
Of course. I find that if you tell more families and women and those that are trying to get pregnant or thinking about family planning about these experiences, it normalizes it and it helps people accept and work through it. I'm very lucky. I went through IVF after that and I have 3 wonderful children. But at the time, I didn't know if I was going to get pregnant again. And so I took time off and really started thinking about what do I do as my second company. So we founded a company called InfiniteMD after I left American Well. That was a second opinion company. And that was an interesting time. There were Best Doctors and all these other companies that were emerging, but we felt like we could tap into the market of my former experience in China, building in our second opinion through that. In addition to thinking about some of the payer relationships I had at American Well with WellPoint, now Anthem, now Elevance. So we understood some of not only the ways that we could work through the ecosystem, but also to build out, how do I think about the pipeline?
Yeah.
So I had some amazing co-founders that I worked with to build that out. And I will say that sales experience, the international experience, everything has actually built some of the credibility that I have now on these boards and as a chief commercial officer.
Yeah, of course. So company one, time off, which we should talk about. I want to hold on to that thread because I'm just coming back from 2 years time off for different reasons, of course, but that's worth the conversation. So then actually, I want to go back even further in your journey. So you mentioned the MD, MBA. We're dialing the clock back chapter by chapter here. It's funny, you're a tiny bit younger than me. When I went through, there was no MD, MBA, which dates me because the program has had, I think it's 20-year anniversary at Harvard.
Yes.
Recently preceded me just by a bit. But what inspired you to do the joint degree program back when we were a medical student? Did you know? Did you understand then, like this?
Yeah, good question.
Interest in entrepreneurship. Curious to learn about your journey.
I will say when I was an undergrad at Stanford, I always loved the idea of medicine and business. So I started Stanford actually thinking I would go into business. I learned Japanese in high school. In the 90s, it was the thing to do if you wanted to do business. And I went to Stanford thinking I would do a business degree. I went to Nepal for one summer and just was blown away by what healthcare could do with just very little in terms of funding, donations, and whatnot. So I started a nonprofit there and then realized I wanted to be pre-med. So I always combined the business and the medical degree in my mind. But then at Stanford, there was also all this tech, right? I was exposed to Facebook and Google while I was there. And so I just always knew that tech was going to be part of it, part of my journey, because it's the way to scale healthcare. And so thinking about the 3-legged stool of business, medicine, and tech, I went into med school still with that mindset, and I didn't plan to have an MBA degree. But first semester in, we learned that this was a second year and they were still picking up applicants. So this is in 2005.
Okay.
And I think they had their first cohort it was an experiment with three classmates the year prior. So I applied for this second year and I was the first with another female friend who both of us got in to this program. We were the first class that were female MD MBAs at Harvard.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was interesting at the time because traditionally the business school has been about 30% women, 70% men. And there's this whole joke about how when you speak in class, there is a certain way that you have to carry yourself and make yourself known because all of your grading system at the business school is focused on comments. And women do tend to, and they've trained us on this, is to speak louder and be more confident so that you're not being mansplained to. So there's been a lot of interesting ways to manage that. We should also talk about that because
Oh my
that's
gosh,
a whole
yes.
other aspect of it. But yes, I was very lucky. I think I stumbled upon this and got into the program. And since then, it's just been amazing. But I would also caveat this. I think a lot of people ask me, like, do you have to get an MBA? And I always say, not necessarily. I think there are ways to gain that business experience, whether it's through certifications or other things, or even learning on the job through consulting. And then on top of that, I also think for people that are planning their careers, it does give you a bit of a leg up when they're looking for, in a corporate world, promotions and other things. But you can also build your own experiences by starting your own companies and getting the right advisors.
Yeah, absolutely. People ask me that all the time. So I'm glad you talked about it because I didn't get an MBA. And for me, it was on the job training, neither certifications, nor consulting, nor an MBA, nor none of it. But I had your last comment there, really great mentors, sponsors, advisors who I didn't feel afraid to ask questions to. What does COG stand for? Tell me about preferred stock option, like these things that I had never learned about, but I had people that I could just ask. And so had the opportunity to learn on the job, which my dad always was like, don't you think you should go back and get an MBA? And I'm like, I don't have space for that. But I think if I had dialed back the clock, I might have, but I didn't know then. I didn't know then that I would want it. It was, to your point about reinvention. It came later that I even contemplated understanding business and wanting to step into entrepreneurship. So I'm not sure I would have even taken the opportunity of an MBA joint degree program back when I was starting off. So
yeah, that's a very fair point. I do think it's easier to earn degrees earlier because your trade-offs and your opportunity costs later on in life when you get a second degree is a bit higher. And I will say some people do put it off to do executive MBAs where it's like weekend courses, and those still are fantastic. But I would say the flip side is if you can get your degrees earlier on the trade-offs on the loans and the ways that you manage through that, especially because I will also mention the combined MBA program is 5 years. So they shave off half a year on both sides. So you're able to save time instead of 4 years med school, 2 years business degree, it's 5 years total. So instead of 6, it's 5.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you would, if there's a student early in their career, you'd recommend it. I don't want to put mouth, but you're glad you did it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. There's probably some like just basic foundational learnings that you get from doing the dual degree that took me a little bit of effort later on, but I could see earlier on just getting the foundational knowledge about strategy and finance and et cetera, et cetera.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I think the first core year for most business degrees are things like, supply chain, governance, thinking through strategy, marketing, how do you read a financial statement, those things that are pretty basic, but very fundamental for just the grasp. And if you start to think like that, the second years are usually more healthcare focused and value-based care. And are you thinking about starting your own company and entrepreneurship? And so those things I think are also useful as an add-on, but after you have the foundation, it's pretty useful.
Yeah. So tell me this, as I've been thinking of a lot about how we, as have you, about how we really help position our current wave and next waves of clinician leaders as healthcare executives and really sit at the intersection of business, your three, business, healthcare, and tech. I'm going to steal that triumvirate of topics. But what do you think? I've lost my train of thought actually here in thinking about your three. So I've been thinking a lot about positioning, right? This next generation. And what do you think are the qualities and characteristics that make for a good person to sit at the intersection of those three? Business, healthcare, and tech. I can hear it in your journey, but I wonder if you start to be more tangible.
Yeah.
What do you see? So people can start to be self-aware and think about whether they too might succeed in this world.
So I personally think that most people are strong in one of the three more than others. So for example, it's a tech person who was computer science or bioengineering who they may not have full clinical experience, but they can gain that through the work experience. And they also can gain it through the business experience of working for a company. Then there are also those that are clinicians, nurses, doctors. Even I talk to tons of radiology techs and others have had some clinical experience and are trying to progress their career. So they now are working for a telehealth company or doing other things. And then from the business side, many of my MBA classmates, I will even mention that they find healthcare to be so interesting, but they've never they've never had the chance to delve into it. But I think they feel very excited about healthcare because they know that it's a mission-driven industry, and many of them admire and wish that they were in healthcare more. So they start to gain experiences. They start building their own companies and whatnot. The skill set that I think from a clinician perspective of gaining the tech side, I think is, it entails a few things. It's working for industries and starting to build your skill set, whether it's in, let's say, pharma or med device or other places where you're starting to really see what engineering feats are being done, how AI is progressing and changing workforce management. It's starting to carve a niche. I do recommend clinicians to start to carve niches of where they are good within tech, where their skill sets are, where their strengths are, remote patient monitoring, RPM. It could be certain areas where they understand not only the business, but the tech. Yeah. So I would say it's a combination of the two, of understanding how the tech works in the scheme of the ecosystem for business. So I'll give an example. Sure. I talk to a lot of clinicians right now who are academics who are trying to build their own companies. And they're thinking about, okay, how do I understand if I use an RPM model, how do I then make it a business value? So meaning if I can discharge someone with a certain DRG code out of the hospital earlier, I save the hospital more money. I monitor them out of the hospital in home, reduce infection rates, reduce all these other potential risks. And then they're also able to be home and recover faster. And so they start to build these models. And when you understand CPT codes and how the government's reimbursing for it and monitoring blood pressure and whatnot, you can then build a business and not only leverage your clinical understanding of what are the thresholds, but really trying to build the two together. So the tech with the business mindset.
It's so interesting because very often that last little step, which is a big step that you just described, which is translating this breadth of clinical knowledge and experience into a tangible ROI, if you will, and a tangible value prop for the business, is a missing link for clinicians. Yes. Sometimes there's a hesitancy or frankly, just a frank block, right? I don't want to think about business. But I always thought I can accomplish so much more if I can speak the language of the business owners, because that's their language. And you can convince them by talking about finances and ROI and efficiency and profitability, right? And then you get what you want done for the patient accomplished.
That's exactly it. There's a running joke because I have 3 different kids that are so different personality. One loves to understand finance and money and he wants to save. And the other one's, I don't want to be rich. I just want to give my money away. And I'm like, but you wanted to buy something on Amazon. So why don't you try to save your money? And it's like teaching different people's skill sets. Sure. And I think as I meet people, I talk about I actually recommend for a lot of clinicians, it's to think about your job with a business lens. So no matter how clinical or scientific you are, when you work for a company, it's revenue minus COGS, costs, SG&A and COGS is profit. So I approach my roles personally, even to say, how do I help either grow the business for the company? It's top line, it's thought leadership, it's business acumen, it's lead gen, it's growing the size of the market or market share of wallet, get new clients, top line. And then how do I reduce the costs? Even as a clinician, how do I support automation? How do I think about AI? How do I play multiple roles so that this company can use me in multiple ways so that they don't have to hire a ton of people? So when you think about that, then you're helping to generate profit, which isn't a bad thing. Companies need profitability to survive and have runway. So I think about that as a clinician, no matter if you're a telehealth nurse or you're head of business development or you're hired as a CMO, but you're a thought leader, you're still doing either top line or bottom line support.
It's such a great way to think about it. I love that, to think about every role and every job as a business. There's the ins and outs, right? You have to be always contemplating more in and out And that lets you do the great work you want to be able to do.
Yes. And among other things, which is like building the company's ethos and quality assurance, or being helpful to others and learning from other peers, which I think, again, going back to gaining business acumen, sitting down with your CFO. I did that with all my companies. Even if I had an MBA, I'd still sit down, help me understand, what does this mean? Why does this cost this much?
Exactly.
All of those ways of reaching out within your organization. I find that also smaller organizations versus big ones, those that I've had jobs at for when I worked at Elevance, I literally spent time asking experts who were in their field for 20 plus years, how do you think about value-based care? How do you think about remote patient monitoring? How do you think about when you're looking at network providers and contracting? And I learned a ton that way. Or I even sat down with financial experts. Tell me, how do you look at actuarial work when you're deciding innovation? On the flip side, smaller companies, when there are a few folks, I think it gives you a lot of, so first thing is breadth. This one gives you depth of understanding across the industry. For example, if you're an RPM startup company, you get a bit of everything. So I find there are different ways to build your career wherever stage you are and whatever size of company you are.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. As you're talking, there's some characteristics that you clearly have that are worth like really just naming, because as people, you probably get the questions all the time. Should I think about going into business? What is this? So what I hear, a couple things I'll just point out, like ferocious curiosity. Like
Yes,
you
that's true.
clearly want to learn, you want to know, you want to grow, right? So talk about that. Like, where does that come from in you? And I felt that way too. Like when I've hit these curves in my career where I got bored. And when I get bored, boredom is bad for me. And then I'm like, what's my next learning opportunity? But I can hear that in you too. So like, where does that derive from in you?
So I'll say my husband's always been very patient with me because I do have this curiosity, but I'm also easily into a lot of different things. And I have to manage my time very well. And I'll caveat this by saying my curiosity brings me to doing a lot of things, and I like to do things very intensely. But I also have this like threshold I've realized over time that my threshold for being overwhelmed is here. But I get bored so easily that I need to be up here to doing a lot of things. And so there's this like very fine line of when I get overwhelmed versus when I'm at my happiest. So I've had to increase it so that my threshold is higher when I feel overwhelmed, but also that I now know I can balance between this middle ground of like still being a little bit bored, but still being very happy and working on books, thinking about blogs, helping this company, Everly Health, build, and also still being on some boards. I think the curiosity comes from knowing that I'm just in awe of the world. I think there's this New York Times article about how awe creates a lot of joy in learning, and sitting even with the sun on your face, thinking about new experiences, traveling, giving talks, but still meeting new people, still creating some boundaries that are important to have within all these different spaces, but holding space for others and letting others hold space for you and your curiosity. I think these are things that I find very positive. The second thing I'll mention is that I believe in this idea of the gift of, I would say the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. And so I have this belief that there are so many great things that you can do to discover what you're good at. And I tend to want to do that as much as I can, and for others too. But over time, the goal isn't just keep it for yourself. It's to share it with others, which is why, hence writing a book, hence thinking about blogs, and helping others discover their own gifts and journeys so that it can be a communal feeling, an open-heartedness rather than something to save or to accumulate over time.
I love that. So that so resonates for me as I'm entering this third chapter of my career, which feels very much like a giving back phase, right? Or like, how do I take all that I've learned about myself and about the business and entrepreneurship world and help the next cohort of clinicians find their success and have their impact. So that really resonates for me.
I want to mention that you added some amazing feedback for this book that I'm putting together with American College of Healthcare Executives. And what resonated with me when you wrote it was that you were talking a lot about how now is time for you to help the clinicians feel good about their next phase and their next career.
Yeah.
But you're also open. You mentioned this idea of feel the signs, think about what you're doing and moving with the flow. Do you do that a lot too, even when you're seeing people and you give them feedback on, these are some signs, like this is creating burnout, this is not. How do you find your energy so that you start to follow that trail and figure out what your next step is?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's related to one I was going to pose to you. So this is a perfect segue, which is what I hear in you and what I've learned to do is to be really self-aware. I think we don't do it often enough. I meditate, but I didn't always, but I of late have been meditating more and writing more, which I know you do. And I want to talk about that. And I'm just an honest, I'm a talker. So like everything comes out. But what it's allowed me to do is just be honest and to know myself. And I wrote a piece on this once. Clinician, know thyself. Step one. Like you have to stop and observe and pay attention to what brings you energy, what sucks your energy, and what brings you joy, what doesn't bring you joy, right? So self-awareness, I think, is a first step. And I hear that in you, right? Your point just now about like where you need to live on your curves, right? Like curiosity and busyness and versus boredom. And you had to pause and realize like it was too narrow, too tight a window between I'm happy and I'm not happy, right? You had to pause and reflect. And for me, that has helped me. When I got to the end of when I was approaching the asymptote of my academic cardiology journey.
Yes.
I just had to stop and go, what am I feeling here? I'm frustrated. I'm dissatisfied. I'm irritated. My irritation is spilling over into so many other aspects of my life. This is not okay. So then it forced me to pause and reflect. Yeah, I think that's part of it. I hear that in you too, like this deep self-awareness.
And also this curiosity to figure out how to fix it, that you don't have to kind of go through the day and day if you're not as happy. It's like finding ways to either get your energy back and still maintain your day job, or work with your superiors and others to think about, how do I get out of this rut? Or how do I think about adding on things that will give me energy, whether it's mentorship, whether it's other things that fill your cup. So I do that quite a lot. I do weekly reflections about where did I spend my time and how do I improve the way that I'm either giving feedback to my team, getting them to be more motivated. Where did I see myself falter? And then also being very honest with myself. Some things I'm really just not good at. So how do I fill my team with the skill sets that I may not have, or the inclinations that I normally wouldn't be able to embed in my day-to-day?
Yeah. So what I also hear in your comment, which I feel too, is you have to be okay with what you discover. It might not always be positive, right? Like I got to the end of my academic journey and I was like, I'm not going to win a Nobel Prize. Research is not how I'm going to make my mark in the world. Though it's interesting, this journey that I've been on is not going to be my journey going forward. Oh, crap. Like you have to be okay when you pick your head up and you like do this work, this self-work, that you may discover things that are uncomfortable and that you have to be okay with working towards solving them.
I really appreciate that. I will say I definitely wasn't always this happy. I feel like I'm at a good point in my career, but there have definitely been moments. That's why I started a second company. That's why I think you feel like sometimes you're supposed to be doing certain things. But like you said, it's also knowing what you're not good at. And I felt like I wasn't able to be a very good corporate manager at when I was at American at a certain point, or at Elevance. I felt like I learned enough and I wasn't feeling the continued calling. And again, people say within a lot of payers, you can always go back. We've all had this experience of these large corporations. You can always go back. But I felt like at that moment in time, it wasn't the right time for me to continue to stay.
Yeah, for sure. Before we run out of time, we have plenty of time, but a couple of things I want to make sure we go back to. One is your time off. And so I really appreciate you sharing your personal experience. As it turns out, and I've been thinking a lot about this, like we think of life and work on some sort of magically balanced fulcrum of opposing ends of the spectrum, but it turns out it's just life. And all of the things that we do are pieces of that puzzle. And what happens at home and what happens at work they're all intertwined. They're not balanced. They're just interwoven. So I appreciate you sharing your personal story.
Sure.
Tell me more about it to the extent that you're open to sharing. And how did you spend that time? How did you heal? And how did you come back? All of the above. Would love to.
Yeah, absolutely.
People would love to hear your story.
I did a lot of different things. I tried everything from talk therapy to medication I was just going through, I think, a very hard time after a loss, thinking, I don't know if I would ever be a mother. And because it was my first, we didn't have children at the time. And I took some time off thinking all the things that you go through in your head. I would have given back everything just so that the child could survive. Why did I overwork? Was it me? Did I eat something? Of course, I'm a physician, but I still went through those questions because you never know. And humans are storytellers. Like, we need to know a reason. I think we're always looking for answers. And I came to the conclusion that I will never find the answer, and that's okay. We never found out the cause, but I did learn a few important lessons. One is humility, and that I can't control everything. I can only control the things I can control, like my feelings, or maybe not feelings, but how I react to things.
Sure. Perfect.
And then, yes, but also that I think I seeked help. I, for the first time, did not know how to find help. I was always very self-sufficient.
Sure.
And for the first time, I actually went into my community. I found really good friends. I spent a lot of time reflecting and journaling and coming through all of this, believing that I know in my life I need people, and I need people around me. So I started creating my own, I call it board of directors, people that support me and know me and give me advice. Yes. And then on top of that, I think what was truly impactful for me was figuring out how to channel it to something else. So I started a second company because of it, knowing that I was going through such a hard time. And I'm a physician and I'm trained at Harvard and knew all these things, but I still had a hard time finding a second opinion to figure out what happened. And that's when I eventually found an amazing IVF doctor and worked through this second pregnancy. And I wanted more people to experience that and to have access to great doctors that I personally did. And so I channeled a lot of that energy and the bereavement into that. And then lastly, I will mention that emotions are so interesting. Speaking of emotions, I went from sheer pain, and as I tried to redirect my energy and figure out how to find help and community, from agony to it was tolerable but still very difficult, to tenderness, and then it became actually honor of what I lost. And that transition was not easy. It took years, but it really changed how I thought about love and loss and how you think about your own career when you, like you said, you show up with your job every day, but you bring your whole self, right? Because whatever place you're in, your personal life, your spiritual life, all these things you bring into the workplace, and that's when you show up like that. And so I felt like I needed to feel when I went back that I resolved a lot of these issues and I could approach work wholeheartedly, motivated to do a good job.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. The space sometimes you need the space to heal. In your case, you needed that. But there's so many lessons in what you just shared about humility and honor. I love that. I love that perspective of going from anger and fear and pain to
which I experience all of.
Yeah. And being honest and vulnerable with us. I appreciate it. It turns out everybody's gone through something. And I don't say that to diminish your experience.
Not at all, but I agree with you.
To be grateful that you're sharing, because it turns out there's a deep universality in these experiences. As women, so many people have experienced challenges with pregnancy of some variety or other. It's deeply universal, it turns out. So I appreciate that. Switching gears a bit, I want to give you a minute to talk about your most recent book. And I say that because I know there's another one coming out. I love that, like, writing and voice and podcasting. You have an amazing podcast as well, is a way for you to express your perspective and point of view. So tell us about the book, tell us about the podcast, and tell us what you got coming down the pike too.
Absolutely. Thank you. I am again, going back to the meaning of life is to find your gift and the purpose of life is to give it away. I like this idea of supporting more folks around the world to think about digital health innovation. So that was my modus. That was my motive for starting the first book, thinking through how do you help anybody, an entrepreneur within a corporation to a CEO, founder, to others, clinicians, start to understand the way the ecosystem works when you're starting an innovative technology, a company, a organization. And I call it the 5Ps, the stakeholders that you have to manage through: payers, providers, patients, pioneers, and then policymakers who are determining reimbursement and all of the ways that AI is being leveraged. And my other focus has been now, as I started the first book, Digital MD, Revolutionizing the Future of Healthcare. My second focus is going to be on digital MD, but it's clinician to executive and the transformation.
I love it.
Thank you. I think it's after the first book, a lot of people just ask, like, how did you end up having time to be an author and still managing some great work at Everly Well and Everly Health, all these things that I'm juggling. And I felt if I could help people understand a bit more of how they can carve that out and create their own career, it would just be a wonderful experience to try to put it down on paper. So I'm working with American College of Healthcare Executives to publish it likely in the spring 2025.
Great.
And it's just helping, whether it's nurses or others, think about how do you create the skill sets and how do you think about the industry, the private industry, public industry, all the sectors. So I talk through that very openly and just to give people an inkling of how to recreate their own future.
I love that. Yeah, you and I share this love of helping the next generations of clinician leaders really find their path and have their impact in the business world. So I love that. I think first step is for us to just shine a spotlight on great people like you who have done it and who have been through it. And then the next, I think, is for us to teach the next cohort based on our own experiences. How do we give it all back? So I love that. So in the last few moments, anything I haven't asked you that you think is important to communicate? And if not, I'll ask you a few more last questions.
Sure. I think I will mention one thing because I think there is a bit of an ivory tower, and I don't say this lightly, but I feel some people think that you have to get into a good school with good scores and whatnot. And quite frankly, you probably experience this too. Something I've really come to understand is that people don't always, I would say people don't need to have a good degree. They can go to a lot of different great schools. And I've met people that are so smart from all these different great schools. But I think what's interesting is the joy that I have found people have in their careers is from the community that they built, the legacy that they feel, and not necessarily the degrees that they've had. It does give them a bit of an inkling into, it's a little bit of a leg up, but I find that it's not just about the schools in life, but it's using your cards and using curiosity and using your resources. So it's like figuring out within your own confines of what you have, and you put in the extra effort to do that. I feel like that has made a lot of people that I've met very successful. So I always think that going back to what we talked about, seeking opportunities and being curious, I find people don't always make that extra effort and use that as something fun rather than homework to do. And I've changed the switch on that even for myself. There are things that I definitely dread. Sometimes reviewing my manuscript, it is painful, but I try to do that in inklings and I try to do that in spurts sometimes. But I also find the second thing is that happiness comes from managing reality minus expectations. It's also an equation I think through, because I've set my expectations sometimes way too high up in life sometimes, and I don't want to set it too low either. So I feel like I found an interesting middle ground of where my expectations for my own career and life sit so that I can be happy with where I am. And I've also, because I've met on the flip side, people who have very high expectations, going to certain schools, doing certain things, wanting to be CEO or doing other things that may not be at the right time for them. And it may be in 5, 10, 20 years, and still being happy with where they are now is key. So part of the ambition is good, but it's also, it has to be caveated to some extent by where you are and how you use your resources and whatnot. So that's what I would give advice to for folks and people that are thinking about their next careers. It's, again, going back to some of the things we talked about, knowing yourself, knowing your resources, being in awe, being curious about things, and then setting expectations so that you know where you are so that your reality matches some of those expectations.
I think that's a perfect ending spot with those wonderful words of wisdom born out of what has been an incredible career to date, and no doubt what will continue to be a great career going forward. So Liz, thank you so much for the conversation. I love this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation for me too.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Leadership Rounds, where clinician executives share wisdom and insights on what it means to be an exceptional leader in healthcare. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, comment, and share with your friends and fellow leaders in healthcare. Join us next time for another dose of leadership wisdom. Until then, I'm Dr. Reena Pandey. Thanks for listening.